Well, in ministry, there's a lot of conventional wisdom that we would not encourage you to follow. And so today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to share with you 7 ministry ideas that we reject.
Well, welcome to Practical Church Planting. My name is Brian, and with me is Dylan. And today we are going to talk about 7 ministry ideas we reject.
And this episode is brought to you by the Practical Church Academy. You can go to practicalplanting.com to learn more, but basically it's a monthly subscription where I share monthly video trainings, weekly quick snippets. There's a SpeakPipe option where you can send me personal questions about your church. And one of the best things about it is you can buy our Growing Your Launch Team course for $149, or you could subvert the system, and join the Practical Church Academy for only $14, and it's also included. And so really, this is just more personal access to me. I do trainings, short trainings every week, and then a longer training each month. In March, it was small groups, how to run them effectively. And then you can actually send me your personal ministry questions, and happy to answer those as well. So go to practicalplanting.com, and you can join the Academy right on the front of the homepage. And if you're in the launch phase, pre-launch phase of your church, you can also get the the Growing Your Launch Team course as a part of it at no additional cost, and then it can save you a lot of money, and a lot of people have been through that course and like it. So practicalplanting.com, check out the Practical Church Academy. Love to help you out in that way. Now today, we're talking about 7 ministry ideas we reject. These would kind of be maybe conventional wisdom or kind of things that people often say that we don't practice or do at New City Church, and so we're going to share what they are, and then we're just going to share why we don't do them. As always, we're not saying always the best way, nor are we saying it's the only way. This is just our experience and what we've learned. And so do whatever is best for you. Do what you feel convicted of. Here has just been our experience and why we don't do some of these conventional things. Number 1 is we don't multiply small groups. We've talked about small groups a lot. Again, if you're in the Practical Church Academy, the March monthly training, I talk about this as well in more detail. We have people sign up for their groups. We call them community groups. You can call them whatever you want. And then the group that you're in is the group that you stay in for as long as you're here, unless you want to start a group yourself, or unless you move, or unless you want to leave the group. We don't multiply our groups. We cap them, and then we start new groups. There's been a lot of benefits for us. We've kind of always done it this way. Again, Sticky Church by Larry Osborne, kind of really run our groups kind of based off that model. That book's really practical, so I highly recommend it. And we've just found that when you try to multiply groups, what you're really doing is splitting them. I mean, multiply sounds good, but you're really splitting them. And it becomes harder for people to build friendships if every year the goal is to split the group. Oftentimes, it's really hard because who goes with who? And oftentimes it's difficult too because it's typically the same group leaders that have to split their groups or multiply their groups continually because they do a good job. They run their groups well. People like being in their groups. And so they're always having to start over, if it were. This was Christine and I's story years ago before we planted New City. The church we're part of was multiplying groups, which is fine. But it's like every year, it's like we have to somehow tell half our group, you have to leave. And picking who that was led to hurt relationships. And then you had to find another leader. And it was just hard. It's so good for us. And Brian can speak to it because he kind of coordinates our groups. You join a group. The group you're in is the group you're in. If it's capped, we're just honest about the groups we have available. And that's how we do it here at New City.
If it's capped, it's capped.
Yeah.
Not really with mine currently.
The only person who doesn't do a good job of this is Brian.
The one who doesn't do it is the one that's supposed to be in charge of everything. So ours, I think we try to, there's no real hard cap.
Right.
Sometimes your space caps it, but we kind of shoot for no more than 10, 12 is the max, but 10 is a really good number. We have 16, and it's a good problem because people kept inviting others. Right. Because we aren't multiplying, we are actually getting closer and closer together, and so people are inviting others. And so my hope to that is I actually have someone in mind that I think could be a potential good leader. And so that wouldn't mean half the group going with him, but right. If someone did because they wanted to support him, we'll have those conversations. There's some anomalies here and there,
yeah.
But really what we try to do is we cap them in a certain amount, like I mentioned, 10 or 12. And when, another example is there was one group that did split. That's such a strong term,
yeah.
But it was because of logistics. Now that sometimes happens. We have a lot of babies that are being born here in New City, and so that causes some complications. One group is they were starting late because of where some of the others worked, more in the hospital or nurses, so they weren't getting off till late. Well, the host couldn't keep the baby up that late, so we had a group kind of merge out of that one, but it's both positive, and it was purely just logistics. So it's not a hard and fast thing you can't split. But I wouldn't even call that a split. That was just more we want to make sure that everybody is being ministered to, and this is the best way to do that.
And part of this is you tracking group attendance. We've talked about this in previous episodes. For us, I think about 12 is a good number we found. And then what happens is when you cap a group, you no longer offer it as an option. And again, we've talked about this a lot in this episode. You can only offer what you can offer. You can only do what you can do as a church. And so we have groups that are available. Sometimes they're not as close to where that person lives or the night that person wants it, but it just is what it is. We can't offer unlimited options. And so we cap the groups. What happens is we've experienced that capping them actually leads to more groups, because otherwise you can have a little bit of the issue with Brian's group right now where you have so many people and you kind of stuck of like what you want to do. Typically we cap them, and then as we have new people, 3 times a year we take a break for about 4 to 6 weeks, and we do groups again. Every time the group that you're in, you don't re-sign up with, you just stay. But we typically will often start a new group if necessary each one of those times. And then if someone's in a group that wants to lead it, again, we don't make half the group go with them. We allow anyone that wants to, if they want to go with them, or they can. But what often happens, maybe somebody goes with them, most often not, and they just take new people to start a brand new group together, which often works really good as well. And so we just here are the groups we have available on these nights, the ones that are open. Like, we don't do the thing online where it shows like where all the groups are and you can just like click the group that's closer to you. Because again, for us, we cap our groups. And so we tell you what's available. And I mean, there's positive and negatives of everything you do. The problem with letting your group get too big is that it might be good for the new person that's trying to join it, but then it's bad for everybody else because there's less people to talk, there's less conversation, there's less friendship. And so the better thing is to cap them. And then it kind of forces you to start new groups. So we've had this in the past where we've had people didn't have places to put them. And so like it forces you to find a leader and build a leader and do it. And so in terms of how you can do that more easily, I don't keep saying this, but the Practical Church Academy, we talk through like how we do our group leader guides and how at least our process is pretty simple to lead a group, which helps for us. But we don't multiply them. We say, this is your group. And if you like it, you can stay in it. People need friendship, especially in our culture today, especially in the West when there's just not a lot of friends in America, American culture. And so these are the people. And oftentimes it takes over a year to really build deep relationships with people. And if you're having to keep starting over, that can be really hard.
Yep. And one final thing I'll add is try not to circumvent this philosophy that we have in New City by saying, well, we have 18, but maybe only half of them come every week. Like, I get that, and that's how the case with ours. But then that's still 18 people your leadership needs to be responsible for as far as following it up. And that becomes a daunting task. So try not to fall into that trap of, we only have half come, so 18's fine. It really isn't. That'll catch up with you. You won't be as effective of a leader. You won't be able to reach and mentor those that you want to.
And it's helpful for us, especially because we track attendance. If somebody's not coming as much, we can have these conversations, ask them if they're still interested, and then put someone else in the group. Because we've had this in our group. I mean, we've led a group the whole time New City has been in existence. There's been times where somebody wasn't as consistent, and we just said, hey, do you want another group? What's going on? Because we have space in our group, and we want it to be full. And so if you're not going to show up all the time, then we got to find something that's better for you, so that again we don't have 20 people in a group, only 10 are showing up, and it's like, what is happening to these other people? So we have a hard cap on our groups, and then we just make new groups. Again, more of that in other episodes on Practical Church Planning that you can search as well, but we don't multiply small groups. Number 2, another idea that we eject is not to look at people's giving. So typically it's maybe most traditionally the lead pastor. I'm not saying if you have a larger staff, everyone on staff does not need to look at the giving. This is typically probably more for the lead pastor role. There's kind of this assumption of if I look at people's giving, it will change how I view them or how I interact with them. And it's just, again, do your convictions. I've always just thought that was interesting because when I ask people why this is the case, they're like, well, somebody told me. They just heard that this is what you're supposed to do. And so they've done it, which is fine. But it's is this your conviction, or you just feel like it's the quote unquote white thing to do? I have found, if we're being honest, people as a pastor will tell you about their sex life, other issues they're dealing with. I mean, how often people are serving, if they're in a group, if they're involved in any other aspects of life of your church. And my guess is it doesn't impact how you care for them. And so my challenge would be, if you know all this other stuff from some people, knowing their money thing is not going to change anything. I mean, my experience, it has not changed for me at all about how I interact with people. Again, if you know all these other things, again, things like, are they serving or not? And it's well, do you care for them if they don't serve? You probably still do. And so for me, the cons, the pros of looking at it far outweigh any cons. I haven't really experienced any cons. It's people are invested, if they're involved. We don't care. For us, it's not how much they give. It's just, is there consistency to it? There have been times, and you have probably experienced this, if not you will, where people want to meet with you because they're angry about some change or they don't like it. And there have been times where I will look at their giving before these conversations. And there have been times where they have, there's a couple of years into New City, someone was really mad. It was frustrated about something, which is fine. I'm not this is not me complaining about them being mad. I mean, we had a disagreement, obviously, but they were frustrated with something. Before we met, I looked at their giving, and they had never given in 2 years, and ever, once. And I was like, oh, wow, I didn't even know this. And so, like, it really helped guide the conversation. For me, it's just like, well, they're frustrated. They want something different to happen, but they're not fully invested here, if that makes sense. And I hear me, there's exceptions where people can't give, whatever. This was not this case. They could give. They were both working full-time jobs, him and his wife. Like it was just like, oh, it really shows like, hey, are they invested here? So I hope you understand what I'm saying here, but it's just like, it has actually helped me. It's like, man, they people, if they want to do all these things, but they're not really serving or they're not really giving, it's like, you should still hear people out, but it's like, is this your church or is it not? And so I haven't found no negatives to it. I've only found positives to it. It's also helpful too to see like if people increase their giving. Like I'm the one, when somebody gives for the first time, I send them the email. Because I check it, I don't like go in and check everybody's giving. I don't do that. But like I'll check once a week new givers. And when I'm on there, I'll kind of see like if somebody's given like a large gift, whatever. And if so, I'll reach out to them and say thank you. Mm-hmm. And again, people like feel weird about thanking people that are really generous because not everyone can be generous. But we don't feel weird about thanking people who serve with their time a lot or do other things. And so if we can encourage other behaviors in our church, we should also encourage generosity in our church when we see it. So I'm a fan. I mean, I'm not looking at it every day. I'm not like, but like I see it. And it allows me to help interact with people, I think, better because it also allows me to know kind of where they're at and where things are going. And so not looking at people's giving. If you're the lead pastor, I highly recommend that you figure out if you don't want to do it, why, not just because someone told you not to. And I don't know, maybe try it and see if it affects how you interact with people.
Yeah, and if it's one of those things where that you do have a very strong conviction about doing that, like, abide by that, but it doesn't mean that if you accidentally see it or you're like, oh wow, that was a great contribution, that now you somehow have to go and repent because you thought that way. Like, obviously I know no one's probably thinking this, how Dylan said is it's not being used as leverage at all. Mm-hmm. It's more of to create a context through a tough conversation, in a context that you as a pastor or leader have in the back of your mind, not that you bring to the table. Whenever you have like people coming over for dinner, you bring the food to the table, not the pots and the pans. So I think it helps you give you a better frame of reference of where your partners are, the people that go to your church, and not so much assessing whether they're really good Christians or not.
And part of this depends on the size of your church. But like if your church isn't massive, you don't know what everybody makes, but you probably can like have somewhat of a guess. And so for me, it's just been like, it's been encouraging for me. And I try to encourage people that do give consistently. And I know they don't make a ton or whatever. I found nothing but good things to review it from time to time. I have found no negatives to it. And so I've looked at it and I think it's helped me pastor people better because what people do with their money shows where their hearts are at. And so it's an important thing. Number 3, sermon writing can't be done early. So this is obviously not a new surprise. We talk about this a lot on this podcast. But Saturday night at 9 p.m. does not have to be your sermon deadline. Sunday morning at 5:30 a.m. does not have to be your sermon deadline. It can be earlier, and I think it will actually help you enjoy. If you preach somewhat consistently, it'll help you enjoy ministry better if you set artificial deadlines to get things done. Now, this is true for any aspect of whatever you do, but especially for preaching. You can spend way too much time on preaching because you're undisciplined in your study and writing. So you're checking your email, your Facebook every 10 minutes. You never feel like it's done, so you're always writing. At some point, there's diminishing returns. Like you're spending all this extra time, and it's not getting any better. And so we've done other episodes of how to on sermon prep and that sort of thing. The February training on Practical Church Academy was on sermon prep and that sort of thing, and my schedule and how you can do it. And so I share my setup, and I share all my stuff on the Practical Church Academy of how I do it. Again, not because my way's best, but just to give you an idea. But it should be done. So for me, Thursday, like 9:30, 10 a.m. is when my sermon is done. And I'll look over it Saturday night for like 10 minutes, but like literally just like look over it. I'm not like practicing it, and I'll look over it a little bit on Sunday morning, but it's done. And it allows me to be a lot more free with my schedule. It makes, Saturdays actually enjoyable. But sermon writing can be done early. I would say put an artificial deadline and then just stick to it. And if you stick to it, I think it'll help you be more focused when you're writing and allow you to focus on things that are important besides just sermon prep if it's undisciplined in how you approach it. So.
Well, Dylan's been doing this for a while, but I am actually preaching here end of April. And so I'll let you know how that goes as far as if I plan early enough. or whether it helped me, because it seems like something that's going to take a bit of time if you don't already do that now. You know, you're going to have to. You might be a little uncomfortable, like, wow, I haven't looked at this in 2.5, 3 days,
Right?
And it scares you. Like, it's something to ease into, but it's definitely not like if you are not studying and praying until midnight on Sunday or Saturday evening, then somehow God's not going to bless your sermon.
Yeah,
that's just not true.
That's a really good point. This depends on how consistent you do it. So if you preach regularly, you can have a rhythm like that's, you know, find a rhythm that works for you and then get that artificial deadline. If you don't preach as regularly, obviously it's going to look a little different for you because if you're not preaching every week, well, then it's not like every weekend you're trying to put together a sermon. My advice, we've talked about in the past with the previous Brian, who would preach, you know, about once a quarter or so at New City, was he would set up times where he was doing it and writing it, and he would learn, like, I still need to be done by this time. So he might review it on Saturday night because he doesn't do it as consistently, which is fine. But like there are certain times on his schedule, the weeks leading up, when he's working on the sermon and when he's not, and so he can still be like, hey, I've done what I've done, because it can be even easier when you don't preach as often, and so you have quote unquote more time to like spend way too much time on it. Mm-hmm. And so obviously, if you don't preach as much, this point is probably not as helpful. Really, it's for those that have preached consistently, so that they're not every week waiting the last minute. But if you do preach not super consistently, still trying to figure out a rhythm of what you enjoy, what you like. Again, I wouldn't say feel bad about looking at it on Saturday if it's not something you do every single week. But if it is, I would say you should find some artificial deadlines to make sure it's done, so you're not always looking at it. So sermon writing can't be done early. We reject that idea. Number 4, you can't enjoy your job most of the time. Now, I don't know that people actually like say this, but it can be in ministry where people just talk about the difficulties and the stress, which is true. I'm not trying to downplay it. You know, there's these studies of like the 3 hardest jobs in America or whatever, maybe not America, but just like the hardest jobs in general. It's like, they'll say, it's like, I forget what they are, like a president of a university, like some sort of surgeon or something, and then a pastor.
Okay. I thought
I don't know what those 3 are.
Administrator of school, I thought was.
I think it was like a president, principal, something like that, however they define it. Like the head person of some sort of school or university, maybe some sort of surgeon or something, and then a pastor. And there are hard things, there are difficult things. I have to have a conversation in a couple days with someone who wants to meet, and I'm not looking forward to it. Like stuff like that's a bummer, because then it's like, it's not like your whole week is tainted, but we record this on a Monday. It's happening in a couple of days, and I'm just like, I'm going to be thinking about it all week, which kind of sucks. But maybe I shouldn't have said that on a podcast. Kind of stinks.
Radio edit.
That's right. So like there are hard things about it, or if there's been just difficulty in the church, or if there's been like friction, like I get it, it's hard. I think some of what makes pastoring difficult is that we aren't disciplined or structured with our schedule, and so not only you have some of these hard things, but then you have like your schedule that seems to always be on other people's timelines. And so like you're stressed out because you don't have any defined rhythms in your own life. And we've talked about this on various episodes of like for me personally, when I meet with people, when I don't, like it's pretty structured. I mean, I'll make exceptions, but they're exceptions and they don't happen very often. And so I would just say like, we get to do this. There was a tweet by some pastor, Clay something, I don't know his name. He was in Georgia. And he said, I'm going to look this up real quick, see if I can find it.
Jars of Clay?
It was not Jars of Clay. Because I retweeted it. Hold on, let me see if I can find my profile. He talks about this kind of thing of like how when we get together as pastors, sometimes we can kind of complain about how hard it is, which is fine. Like we need spaces to be honest. But he says this way. Well, I'm getting there. This is further away than I thought. Okay, I can't find it. But basically, it's something to the effect of like, we go to conferences and we're just like, hey, ministry is hard, keep going. Like, this is difficult, which is, it's a true encouragement. But he's like, I would love to go to a conference where they basically talk about, we get to do this. And the reality is like here it is. I attend a lot of pastors' conferences and the theme is usually don't quit, it's hard, but hold on, which is a needed message for sure. I would also love to attend a conference one day where the theme is, can you believe we get to do this? What a privilege. This is awesome. And I think this is actually more encouraging because it reminds us that in the difficulty of what we're trying to do, it's really amazing that we get to help shepherd God's people and we get to be in their lives and they're honest with us and they trust us with their time and with their money. Like it's a really cool thing to do. And so I think that mindset of ministry is not always miserable, but also how we structure our time, I think can help, because if you're going from place to place, if you've got no real boundaries on what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, it does make it more difficult. But there are hard things, and New City's about to turn 6, and so there are times where it's just like, man, like I would just love a break. And at some point I'll take a sabbatical and it'll be great. Like, yeah, of course, like the preaching every week. I enjoy preaching, but they're just like, what that means is I've got to write a sermon almost every week. And there are times I'm like, I don't want to write anything this week. Like, I just don't. And so, yes, it's hard, but it's like, I actually enjoy what I do. Like, it's a privilege to get to what I do. Like, I'm glad that I get to do this. And so, anyway, your job does not, you can actually enjoy it most of the time. And maybe it's just a mindset and / how you use your time, but it doesn't have to be miserable.
Yeah, I just thought about this actually this weekend, maybe even more this morning. I have a tendency to let something that's in the very near, or actually very far future, like I mentioned, preaching at the end of April, kind of makes me anxious and kind of ruin all the weeks up to it. Now, some of that is, some of you may suffer with some anxiety and some true things that really affect that. So definitely, surround yourself with people that can help with that. But I really think, as Neely mentioned, the schedule. I am one of those that I plan for things to go wrong. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's kind of stifling and paralyzing sometimes, because then you actually you talk about all the things that you're excited to do and you actually don't ever do them. And so kind of how that ropes in here is be excited about what you're doing currently, and don't be worried so much about the parts of the job that you're not the biggest fan of, because no matter what job you have, there's going to be moments like that. Even in your family life, there's going to be conversations you're going to have with your spouse or with your family members that you don't like, but you don't say, I'm not married to you anymore or anything like that. So it's more of a life lesson. But there has been the one reason why I kind of stayed away from any type of ministry for a while is this type of thinking that it is so hard. You're going to be exhausted and depressed all the time. There are going to be moments about that, but it was just like, sometimes I feel like those comments came from individuals who almost wanted to make themselves feel that they're doing something important because they really didn't think so. Like maybe they weren't happy doing this. And so if they can share how difficult it is, it somehow gave them some type of victory over it, which there's part of that, but I don't think that's very healthy. And for the most part, those individuals didn't stay in ministry too long with that mindset.
Yeah. So I
don't even know where I went and tried to bring.
So
it
I
back,
have a question for you. I didn't ask you this ahead of time, and I'm not setting you up, so you can just ask this how you feel honest. So you've been at New City. I mean, you've been on staff for about 3 or 4 months now. Mm-hmm. Like, how has your thought? Like, has it been terrible, awful, good, bad? Like, how is it? I mean, more in a vocational ministry role now. Talking about it doesn't have to be miserable. Like, how has your experience been? How do you feel? I don't know what I'm trying to ask. Like, not so much. I mean, some part of it is on New City, part of it is just ministry in general.
Yeah.
But it's like, hey, this has been a good thing, or like this stinks, or whatever.
See ya. No, it's not if anything, it's not a New City thing. It's ministry.
Yeah.
For me, the hardest thing, it's been difficult. There's been ebbs and flows, and I've really tried to focus on the positive that what I think, or what God has revealed to me that I'm doing here at New City. But it really comes down to almost having to be on constantly. Mm-hmm. And I'm not, that is not my default. I can be very introvert, like I'm an outgoing person, but I get my energy from being alone. People drain me. I don't mind being drained, but to get filled back up again takes a lot longer than the average person, but God can still use someone like me. So what I'm really learning and leaning on others is how I feel in a certain moment or right after something most of the time isn't truly how I feel. And so that's a battle that I've had to face and wrestle with, that, there are going to be some people who are going to be gung-ho about ministry all the time because it taps into who they are as a person. They're extrovert, they're outgoing, and so it feeds into that. Where that's not always the case. So I enjoy, to be honest, I'm preaching, and I've done it before, but leading up to it, there's some anxiety. I am, man, it's almost like this is kind of in the way of other things I want to do at the church. I can't look at it that way, but what more naturally comes to me is those one-on-one conversations that I have with people, or teaching where I can get feedback. So as a sermon, as many of you know who are actively preaching often, it's a monologue. You don't get that feedback all the time. Yep. And some people are okay with that. I struggle with not getting that feedback immediately or that interaction. So that's going to be an area that I grow in. So I appreciate the opportunity, but there you go.
But I think too, part of it, I mean, Brian mentioned here too, is that you have this idea in ministry that it's going to be 24/7, not because ministry actually is 24/7, but because it's everybody's last minute, whatever. So I think hopefully some of that's been, it's like, yeah, we work and then we don't work. This has been a struggle for us. Our worship and production director moved to Charlotte recently. And so we've been having some conversations about, other people potentially stepping into the role. And one of the problems I've run into in the past couple of months is like people who are interested in doing more, but they had bad. They weren't necessarily on a staff previously at the church, but they've played in bands at churches previously, and like the pastor's sermon was last minute, so the things were getting changed, and like they're so worried about it not being, they've got another job. This would be like a part-time side thing. They're so worried about it being all over the place, so they wouldn't have any like time off. And so I'm like, at least at New City, that's not how it is. Now you can't just because I say it doesn't actually mean it's true. They'd have to see it to experience it. But yeah, there's this idea of like everything's last minute, and I think that's partly what contributes to not enjoying it. So,
yeah, I would say here at New City, like Dylan does a good job of being prepared to where when things do go wrong, like there's some buffer. I'd say this past week I didn't put in all of the message notes for Dylan's sermon. Skipped over a couple of things. So I was literally, I think it was 15 seconds before the sermon started. I got things done, went in the streaming room. So you're going to have days like that. And so I'm learning, okay, book more time to do this, or for things are probably a lot of times going to go wrong or not go as expected. And with Dylan being prepared, it allows me to navigate those things rather than scramble.
Yeah. So things are always going to go wrong, but if you can prepare everything you can ahead of time, you're not like trying to get things ready as they're going wrong. You can focus on one thing at a time. So, number 6 is number 5.
Yep.
Yeah, right. Is that you should always be available. So this goes with the last point. At any whim, whatever. Like I turn my phone off at 9:00 at night, and like I've told a few people about that, and they're like, "That's kind of weird." And one other guy was like, "I actually do the same thing, but I have an Apple Watch, and so if people still want to call me." And I'm like, "Well, that's not quite the same thing." I mean, he turns it off because he doesn't want to be on his phone, but he wants to be, accessible during emergencies, which I get it. I'm like, it's like a pastor, you can't do this. I'll just say this: I have never in 6 years. I know it will happen at some point. Never in 6 years been called in the middle of the night about an emergency that I could do anything about. Never. At some point, I know something's going to happen at 2 a.m., and I'm not going to find out about it until when I turn my phone on, which is normally around 7:30. And I don't know what book it was or what. Maybe it was James Clear or Cal Newport or something, but they were talking about not living 99% of your life off of a 0.1% possibility. And so that's our problem with like social media. Like we don't want to miss out, whatever. So we run all of our lives on these things that like will never happen. And so like, yeah, so that's a thing of where for me, it's just a good rule that I found. So for me too, like when I meet with people, like I have my Calendly thing and there's certain times available. It's not 9 to 5. It's just the afternoons. And of course there'll be exceptions and that sort of thing, but you should be available at some points, but always available means you can't do sermon prep when you need to, or do some of the other tasks that you need to do, or do things that you enjoy, or have time for your family or for hobbies. If you want to make it in long-term in ministry, you got to have stuff that you enjoy to do. And so you can't be on call 24/7. You can only do what you can do. You're just one person. I know, I always think, I know culture is different today, so it is what it is. But I'm like, yeah, like 50 years ago, 70 years ago, you'd have to go to somebody's house if you needed something. You couldn't call them, you couldn't text them, you couldn't email them, you couldn't do anything. And people survived for all of human history. And so always being available also means that maybe like, for me, hear me, I'm not saying you got to do what I do, but I I don't have text notifications on my phone. So like if I see my phone, I'll see like a little red dot if I open it, but like it won't vibrate. It doesn't show me anything on the home screen because it's like I'm working on something. I don't need to be on my phone every time it goes off. And so I don't have really any notifications on my phone in that way. And so I'm just saying, these are just things that have helped me. I'm not saying I got to do it. I know there's exceptions. Like for example, if there really was an emergency, since I'm married, if I was really needed and I didn't answer my phone, somebody would call Christina. Yeah, there's things around it. My kids are also young. They're not driving. They're not in college. And so I know when they get older, the phone thing will look different because, my kids don't have phones right now. So I'm not worried about, they're the only people that I would really make a continual exception for is my wife and my kids, and they live in my house. So that I don't need that. And so, yeah, you don't always need to be available. I always find when there are times you can be available and when there are times I'm not going to be available. This will also help you enjoy ministry because you got a little bit more structure to your life.
And if there are some times where certain people at your church or your community group or whatever you call them normally ask to meet with you, then you can kind of make that available.
Right.
But another time during the week you make unavailable. Like, don't add it to your schedule. So I try to leave mine open usually like Saturday mornings because I'll get breakfast with guys often from my community group, and that's a perfect time to just meet. And we go to this awesome diner. It's like really cheap.
Where do you go?
It's called Sonny's.
Where's
It's right
this?
near the Bojangles and the Dunkin' Donut.
Oh, never been
That
there.
one on the far right.
Right near my house.
Yeah. Oh, it's great.
In case you guys are wondering,
Yep,
the
in case you
Bojangles
guys
and
wanna-
Sonny's is right near my
If
house.
you want to drive over here for Sonny's. So, and even on the evening, I think a couple times I'm like, all right, I give myself some time, some flexibility in the afternoon where if I'm meeting with someone after they get off of work, then I'm technically leaving work earlier. So switching availability is not what we're talking about. We're talking more about like adding stuff and saying, normally this is my time or with my family, and then you're replacing that with something else. Like that's just not healthy.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. Is like if you're gonna do a lot of stuff extra after hours, then you should compensate in other ways. I'd also say that was a good point, and I was going to say something else. Oh yeah, so like for me too, like I'm so like on my Calendly, for example, it's only like Monday to Thursdays is when it's the days that I'm available to meet if I don't have things going on. I used to have Fridays afternoon, and then I found that they got picked a lot, and I was like, I don't want to. Friday afternoon, like I don't. I mean, Saturday's my day off. Friday, I don't do as much stuff, and I'm like, I don't want to go to this meeting. I'm not in the mood, and so I actually on my calendar, it's Friday's not available, but I will email people if it doesn't feel like work or if they're a good friend. I will say also I can do Friday afternoon if you prefer. It's not on there. Just let me know. And so like Friday afternoons are just reserved for people that like. It's actually exciting, or it brings me energy, or like something like I want to do that doesn't feel like work. And so you might be exceptions in that way, like certain people or certain types of meetings or certain things are more draining. And so I would figure out where to put them in your week that doesn't mess up times that are not as draining. So yeah, you should always be available is not true. Now, number 6, God will provide typically how we want, if you're faithful enough. That God will provide if you're faithful enough. Now I know a lot of us like don't necessarily think that, but I think we can still think that a little bit. It can be a struggle of like, if I do the right thing and things don't work out, like I must have done something wrong. I know one of the struggles in ministry that I really felt in COVID. I mean, I felt it in a lot of ways, but I really felt it a lot in COVID because I have tried, I do try to be somewhat transparent with like my community group or with not everybody, with like certain people. If I feel like they understand where I'm coming from, of like the struggles, just like people tell me their work struggles, I try to share mine when they're appropriate. And so a really good example of this is when COVID came, we moved into our building like right before COVID, our rent more than doubled, and then we had to close it down, and like, it was awful. I mean, literally the timing could not have been worse. And I remember trying to be honest with people of like, hey, this is like a real big stressor for me. Like, I don't know how it's going to happen. People would be like, it's okay, God will provide. And one of the struggles I found in being in ministry is people assume that just because you're in ministry that God will provide for you the way that you want it. And it's like, that's not true. Also, it's all kind of like, I don't know. Like imagine someone saying, hey, I lost my job. And I was like, well, God will provide. Or like this really stressful thing's happening. And I'm just like, well, my first response is like, God will provide. And I know people didn't mean anything by it. I get it. I was like, it made me feel very unvalidated. And I also wanted to say, you don't know that. Yeah. You don't know that we will stay in this building. A lot of churches not only lost the building, closed during COVID. And so like, I was just like, and now fortunately for us, that was not our case. We're still in this building. God's been really kind. It's been really cool. But it's not true that God will always provide. Now, I think if you're listening to this, you probably don't think God's always going to provide. But sometimes we think if something's wrong, I just have not been faithful enough. And you could do really good things. You could have made a decision that was actually wise and right, and things that might have gone poorly. But God will provide if you are faithful enough. This is not always true.
Well, what's that old saying? I don't know how old it is, but it's more of not the amount of faith, but it's the object of your faith.
Yeah.
Is the most important thing. So. I don't know where I was going with that, but I agree with what Dylan said. I was trying to add something, but like sometimes you just put it so succinctly.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah,
Brian.
no problem.
You're only saying that because you mean it.
Yep, and because you're my boss. Not really though. Like you are, but like it's a good relationship. Like,
Yeah.
it's not like I'm just gonna crack the whip if I don't.
By the way, Brian turns. As of when we're recording this, this will be a couple days after this comes out. Brian was just turning 40, so happy birthday, Brian.
Well, actually, it'll be.
No, that's right. That's this week. When's your birthday?
It's Saturday, so this will be coming out after my birthday.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you listen to this. Brian just turned 40.
Yep.
So if you're in the Practical Church Planning group, send happy birthday
hey.
with his.
Even sing
Brian.
it, record it, and send it to me.
Bonus points. We should give something away if somebody does that. I don't know what it is If somebody literally does that, if they record themselves singing "Happy Birthday" to Brian Brammer, you will get something awesome from us.
I will give you the first print copy of the first game we're publishing at Tangerine Games.
That's even better.
I'm serious.
I'll give you something ministry related if somebody does that. That would be amazing.
If you don't like board games, still don't give you something ministry related.
Yeah, like I will seriously. So anyway, but God will provide if you're faithful enough. It's just not true. Sometimes you will make the wise and you'll make the right decision, and it will not always go well. So it doesn't mean you did something wrong. And then last but not least, this one might be a little bit controversial, so we'll explain. We never try to do things for shock value, so let me explain. I'll say it, and I'll explain what we mean. Serve where you are gifted. So a lot of times, especially when they're trying to get people to sign up to serve in some way, like, hey, serve where you're talented, where you're gifted. That's not really the approach that we take at New City. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I do think it's pretty unhelpful. Let me just be totally honest. Serving in the parking lot or serving in hospitality, making coffee, doing slides or sound, like some of these things are in the kids ministry. Some of these things take skill, like you need to learn how to do it, but it's not like you're naturally gifted at this and you should only do the things you're naturally gifted at. Church is a family, and so like just like you serve and you do chores at your house because they're good and the right thing to do, you serve. This is why we use the wording of partnership at New City Church instead of membership. Like this is something that we do together, and so we serve maybe not because we enjoy it or we love it or it's the thing we are best at, because it's good for the church and it is good for us. We have found over the years that giving people tons of options and saying serve where you're like it translates to less people signing up because there's too many options. People might like something, they might not think they're good enough at it, even if they like it, so they won't pick it. We have now we're just kind of like hospitality, production, and band, and kids. Those are the three areas. Like even on our website, we had all the options. Those are the three areas. You pick an area. What we found is you just get in somewhere, and then as you have ideas, as you meet people, if you want to do another position or if you want to try something else, it's much easier to do that if you're already connected than saying, hey, use your talents for God's glory, which 100% for, but oftentimes we're talking about serving, we're talking about like the worship experience or within the church. And so things that need to happen to make ministry happen. Yeah. And so obviously the big things like in the community, starting stuff, like I'm not talking about those things. Obviously you want to have some gifting there, but in terms of like initially getting people plugged into your church, we don't use like the gifting language. It's more like, hey, get involved, and then you can kind of figure things out once you're connected.
It's almost one of those things where, like, if you think about the worship band, like there does need to be some gifting there, because you are, and it's not so like, oh, we have a great singer or guitar player. It's you don't want people to be distracted because
and that's an area where you have to have skill that we can't train you in.
Right. Yes.
I mean, you can get better at it, but you have to have a predetermined amount of already ready to go.
And again, it's skill, not really like gifted as far as like, I mean, that's weird because God gives you skills, but He also gives you ways to hone those skills and equip them even further. Yep. So a couple stories, I might just share one of, there are those who, when I send out if someone's interested in community groups, I will send out an email and tell them, these are the areas that we have, these are the needs that we really have. So it's like two different things.
For groups or serving?
What did I say?
Community groups.
Did I say groups? Yeah, sure, serving.
Okay.
What he said. For
what I said
serving.
About what he said.
Yeah, exactly.
When people sign up to serve.
For people to sign up to serve, I got a couple different emails.
Yeah.
They'll have like, I'll put what we actually do, like how people partner together with us. And then below that will be like, these are the kind of like immediate needs that we have. And most often than not, they will choose one of those immediate needs. Yep. And so then when they start doing that position, they get excited, they're meeting people, they're talking to people, they're actually kind of coming outside of their comfort zone. And then they're like, I really like this, but this other position I think I would like even better. And it's just like, let's give it a go. So it's not, like Dylan said, waving and pointing someone where to park is something that you can feel a part of, but there's not a waving and pointing gift per se. But if they're comfortable with that, that's a good place to start them at. And then I've even had, we do Insta stories. And so we have one person who's like, does a great job taking the pictures, uploading them right after church.
And she's also in her 60s, which is really funny.
Yeah. Like knows social media more than any of us. And so I was having to do it the week she couldn't. And so I was like, this is a little secret. I might find somewhere else to serve in, so I didn't have to do it. But it's actually one of the things that probably if it can fall off the shelf for that week because we're low, that's kind of the one that does. But we've talked about what are just some certain people that we think could be a good job, and we've just gone and asked them. So they're already serving another area, and we say, hey, would you be interested in doing this? I think now we've got 6 people that are very interested in it. Yeah. And so I don't think they would have said yes if that was the first thing they were doing. So I guess what we're saying is just get them plugged in, get them serving, and usually they are going to take you on their path to the next thing that they want to do. And in this, you're developing them, and then they can eventually develop others. We have coordinators on Sunday who just start out serving, but now, first, second, third, fourth Sunday, they kind of control and make sure people are where they need to be, but they didn't start there. So it's an awesome way to equip people, not only in the church, but also like life skills as well.
Yeah. So if you're doing like a serve push, our recommendation is don't list all of the areas. Don't list all the areas in kids ministry or just like list the 3 areas. And then you, like what Brian does, kind of direct people of like, here are our biggest needs in this area. And typically people are fine. They just, especially if people feel like they're meeting a need, and not just feel, they actually are, they're willing to, that's why they're serving. They're not serving to like fill a position because it feels good. It's like, we actually have a need here if you do this. And so getting people connected. And so parking, that's a great thing. Some people are like, I love to be out there. I love saying hi. I love being the first point of contact, waving people, looking crazy. That's great. Other people like don't want it all. And so they say, hey, can I do this? But if we had given them hospitality, you can be a door greeter. You can be a floater in the lobby who just talks to people as they look by themselves. You could do the handouts. You could do coffee. You could do parking. You could come early and do setup. You could do tear down. Like, they don't know. They don't know what to do. It's just too much. And so giving one option, say here in these, and put in there, people will often say, can I try this? I think that will help you get people serving quicker than saying, here's all the areas, especially in kids. Like, there's a difference between babies and preschoolers and elementary school. But I would just say, have them sign up for kids. And if somebody has a real big preference, then great.
Right.
But most people, especially if they've never done it before, they don't have a preference. They don't even know what preference would be. And so reducing the areas that can sign up and just give them like the blanket areas and then saying, here are our needs, can be really, really helpful.
Didn't we, I think it might have been when I first got here, didn't we do a serve push with specific positions? And did it not go as...
Well, we've done a few of them, so I don't know which one.
Okay.
But yeah.
I think we put like these postcards on this...
In the middle of the lobby?
In the middle of the lobby, yeah.
Yeah, and we got some, but it was like, it was more, there was a lot of options based in each area. In the future, if we were to do something like that, it would just be...
3. It
would just be 3 areas.
Yeah.
And so that way, this is way easier than just like, it's just... People know what they're picking.
And there's probably a little more effort on my end, which I mean, it's my job to reach out and find out those needs, but it's worth it rather than waiting for them to come to you, or they have all these options. They're not going to know which ones to pick. They're just, you give people too many options. They're like, oh, it doesn't matter to me. And then there's nothing really, there's no thing to hang on to, like, hey, I remember you said you wanted to serve here. There's no way to reconnect with them because they didn't ever say anything.
Yep.
So it's just harder to make that stick, other than, if you just say, this is where we'd like to need, can you start serving 2 weeks from now on the 4th Sunday? Like, just say that. And if they can't, they'll tell you.
Yeah. And that's going to be hard too. Like, let's say you have a bunch of options to choose from, and someone's like, they'll do whatever, they don't really care. And they choose an option that you have plenty of people for. Well, then if you come back and be like, hey, can you actually do this instead? They'll probably do it, but they'd be like, that's weird, I chose this. As opposed to saying, I'll sign up, and like, would you mind doing this? When they haven't pre-selected in their mind what exactly they're doing, then they're much likely to go for it. They're not going to feel gypped. Yep. And again, after serving for a little bit, we have found that people will tell us what they like, and we're happy to move them. This is not like, we're not forcing people to any position. We're just trying to get people connected. And sometimes if you kind of talk about serve where you're gifted, it can be kind of overwhelming and hard to do. And so, again, for me, it's a little soapbox thing. There's a difference between talent and skill. Talent is what you're born with. Skill is what you develop. So I get like frustrated. I'm a sports guy, and like they always talk about how talented everybody is, and I'm like, yes, they have talent, but they also work really hard. It's not. There's tons of talented people who do not make it, and so especially with serving, it's not about like natural born talent. It's about getting the position and training them in their skill. And if they have certain things that they enjoy, well, then talking about that, but not leading with that, because you'll get a lot less people to sign up. Because it's like, server, you're gifted, and people might think, well, I'm not gifted in parking people, so I just won't sign up. I don't know what to do. So,
yep, they don't want to set themselves up for failure.
That's right.
Yep.
So those are 7 ministry ideas we reject or we don't do at New City Church. Hopefully that was helpful for you. Again, a couple of things we mentioned. Practical Church Academy. Mentioned that a few times. So you can go to practicalplanting.com, join the academy for $14 a month. Gets lots of training. You can cancel anytime. And you also can get the Growing Your Launch Team course for free included and save you a whole bunch of money if you're in the pre-launch phase. What else did we mention? The Facebook group. If you're on Facebook, Practical Church Planning. Make sure you check that out. And I think that's the things.
I think that's the things.
Cool. Thanks for being with us. We will be with you next Wednesday on Practical Church Planting.
Later days.